Hello, my name is Mohit Deshpande, and in this course we'll be talking about the controller of a social notes application. Now the controller in a model view controller pattern, what it does is it binds together the model and the view. And that's exactly what we've done here. Android follows a model view controller pattern, so we don't have to create our own kind of pattern to work with. Controllers are usually classes that extend a form of activity class, whether it be a list activity or just a regular activity. What we have here is we have our notes activity and it extends list activity. What list activity does is it already presets a view, the view being just a single list view. And in our case, that's all we need. You can see we have a projection here for the cursor that we need to retrieve all of the notes from the database. We have a from and a to array. And what this does is using an adapter, what we can do is hook up the columns in the database or this from column to a view, in which case, because we're extending list activity and we don't have our own list view and we're going to use the default list row, which is just a single line of text, that ID is android.r.id.text1. You can see we have a simple cursor adapter, and we have the ID of the note that we selected, which we'll use later on in the contextual action bar. Alright, let's get on to the Oncreate here. You can see we grab a cursor object. We query using our content URI. We could have queried using a contacts content URI, or maybe a music content URI, but we're using our content URI that we have given to the content provider so that we can access the database. You see we're using our projection here, and the selection is null. Now when the selection is null, that indicates to the content resolver that we want to select all of the rows from the database. We just don't want to limit ourselves to a specific row or a selection. You can see we have no selection arguments because we don't have a selection. And you see this statement here, we're sorting by the title of the note in ascending order. And here we create our cursor adapter, the first argument being the context, the second argument being the layout, and we're using a default Android layout called simple list item 1, and that's just a simple text field with the ID of text 1. And we pass it the cursor object that we created in the couple lines before, and we're using the from. We want to take it from the title database column and put it in, or give it to, the text. And you can see this last argument here is just a general flag statement. We don't need any special flags here. Alright, let's move on to the action callback. Now what this action mode.callback is it's the contextual action bar. So we have an on prepare action mode, we return false because we don't need to prepare anything. On destroy action mode, we set this action mode to null. On create action mode, we use this menu inflator, and what the menu inflator does is it creates or inflates a view from a resource, in which case we're inflating our activity notes contextual action bar. And then it inflates this, it puts all the contents of this menu into the second argument, and that's going to be this menu here. And you see we return true because we know this, we can verify this resource exists. Now not on action item clicked, you can see that in the course on the UI elements, you see that each menu item has an ID. And what we do with this is we get the ID. You see we have a switch statement here, and a couple cases in a default case. Now the default case returns false, because it should be one of these two. You can see what we do here in menu delete is using the content resolver, we delete the note that we have selected. And you can see we call this method refresh list view, and we'll get to that later in the near the end of the file here. We finish the action mode, as in the contextual action bar now returns to the normal action bar. What we have here is this share, and what we do is we create a bundle. In the bundle we put an ID. We create the share dialog, which I talked about in the user interface course. And this is where we set the arguments so that we can later retrieve them in the share dialog class. I've talked about that in the UI course. And then we call show, and what we do is show, since it's a dialog fragment, we have to supply it with a fragment manager so that the manager can give us this video. And then we have a tag just so we can identify this fragment. And again, we finish the action mode. Alright, what we do here is what getListView does is it's very specific to any class that extends ListView. And what getListView does is it retrieves that ListView. And what we're doing here is we're setting the adapter. And here we're setting what happens when you long press on a list item. And when you do, you're given this option right here. What we do is we set the ID to the ID of the item that's checked, and we start the contextual action bar. And then whatever view we selected, we set that to be true. Alright, now in Create Options menu, we simply get the menu inflator and then inflate that menu. On list item, click. Now, when we are to click an item in a list view, what you'd expect it to do is go into an activity where we can edit these things, and that's exactly what happens right here. We create a URI, and what this does with appended ID is it creates a URI with an ID. And with this ID right here, we create an intent, and this intent, we give it an action. And when I talk about this a bit later in the segment, we'll go up to this edit activity, and then we'll talk about what the different actions mean. What we do here is we set the data of this intent to be the URI, and we set the class of this, the first being the context, the second being the class, and we want to go to this edit activity class. And then what this does is it simply starts the activity. Alright, moving on, we have, well, this is what happens when an option menu is selected in the action bar. For settings, we start the settings activity. When we add a note, we start the edit activity, but instead of having action edit, we have action insert. And you can see when we get to the edit activity that these are handled differently. With the menu map, we start the notes map activity. Alright, now this refresh list view I was talking about. What this does is it requeries the database in case any changes are made. Like say we add a note and we go back, then refresh list view is called, or if we delete a note, refresh list view is called. And what this does is it performs the same query as we have done in the Oncreate. And then what we do is from our adapter we call change cursor, and what this does is it closes the existing cursor, and then it starts using this cursor instead. And then we set the adapter again. Alright, moving on to the edit activity. You can see we have a tag for logging purposes. We have the projection, which I've talked about. We have the URI, which was passed to us by the notes activity. We have a cursor. we have some variables here. I'll get to those. Alright, in the Oncreate here, see we get the edit text. We grab them right here in the Oncreate. And for the single button that's there, location, we start the select location activity with the appropriate URI.